All right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Flame. Welcome to the Master Motivation Podcast. I'm super excited that it's Monday and we have another special guest for you guys today. We are streaming live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, and now Twitch. So if you're out there, drop a comment and let us know. But I want to introduce our guest, Mr. Dan Farren. Dan Farren eats life in big bites. He's a writer and has worked in security, stand up comedy, TV, film, podcasts, trade shows, and professional wrestling. He has learned something from all of those professions and will tell you that, believe it or not, change is good for you and how to take those positives from life and your work and make you into the person you want to be. Dan, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, Jason, thanks for having me. It's great to see you again. It's great to be here. Thanks.
So exciting. I've had the opportunity to have several guests on the show, ranging from, podcast hosts, authors, martial artists to professional wrestlers. And that's where we met, is in the professional wrestling industry, in the MPW locker room at the Boys and Girls Club in Simi Valley. I remember walking in my very first time into the locker room and feeling so out of place and so uncomfortable because here I am, the karate guy, as everybody called me, walking into this locker room of guys that have been around for a long, long time. And one of the guys that was always really nice and made me feel welcome was you. You come up, you shake my
Oh,
hand, very,
thank you.
very professional. And I appreciate that. So I'm excited to tell your story because you have a lot of experience, in different professions, different careers,
hmm
and of course, in life as well. So let's get started just by talking about let's talk about how you got into professional wrestling.
Well, it's funny that you're running through all those different types of people you've had on this show, and I thought, good grief, I'm a little bit of all of them. At one point or another, I've done it all. Professional wrestling, I grew up as a fan. No, I didn't start real early, 1971. For a lot of people, no one was even born yet. But for
That
me,
was
I
before
started.
I was born.
I know, thank you. I was waiting for that. I feed you in that line. It started with 1971. The WWF came on TV on Saturday afternoons, and all of a sudden, I started watching it, and I had seen wrestling before, but in fact, as a little kid, I was born in Evansville, Indiana. And I remember one of my earliest memories as a small child was sitting on my father's shoulders at a church social, and they have professional wrestling there. And I have actually researched for years trying to find that show because I would love to see who it was. But all I remember was that that there was this like orange light above the ring. It was outside, and every time one of the wrestlers hit the mat, it made this horribly loud noise, and I would jump and get scared. And my father said, "Danny, don't worry, don't be upset. It's all play." Okay, so I became a wrestling fan, but because of my father, I already knew that, quote unquote, it was cooperative work, But still, it didn't matter. It was still exciting and adventuresome and colorful, and like movies and comic books, and I quickly fell in love with it. And in the late middle '70s, my family moved to Los Angeles, or actually to San Bernardino, California, and we lived about 5 minutes away from the San Bernardino Arena, which was a classic old arena that was built in the 1930s, and was at that point having weekly shows on Sunday nights at 7 o'clock from the local Los Angeles territory. And while it was on its last legs, it was just an amazing group of talent. That's where I first saw Andre the Giant. That's where I saw Roddy Piper make one of his early debuts in Los Angeles there. The Guerrero brothers, John Tolis, Black Gorman and the Great Goliath, all these great names from the past. And I would go there every week on Sundays and pay to go and sit and watch. And one thing that I have learned, one thing that's helped me over the years, especially if you don't always have access to somebody who will teach you about something right away, is to watch them very closely. I'm sure you did the
Hmm.
same thing when you first
Hmm.
got very interested in martial arts. You do the exact same thing. And I would watch this stuff. I would figure some stuff out. After a while, you would start to say, okay, they're all coming out of one dressing room. Something's here. Or they would sometimes walk around the lobby. In fact, the very first wrestler who, as they say, broke kayfabe with me, actually spoke to me as if I wasn't, a mark sitting in the audience, was a classic old school wrestler named Edouard Carpentier. And he was there, and the match was going on in the ring, and I was sitting in the back row, and he came out and he said, "Do you mind if I sit down?" And I said, "Sure." And he sat down, and right before it ended, he turned to me and goes, "Ah, the finish," and got up and left. and then like 5 seconds later, the match actually ended. So I mean, that's how I first learned about professional wrestling, was watching there. And I remember speaking to a guy named Alan Dean Foster one time, who's a very famous science fiction writer. And I asked him for advice on writing, and I think that his advice you can use in anything you do in life. And he said, for every one word you write, read 1,000. So
Hmm.
whenever I've done anything, so whenever I promoted matches or worked behind the scenes in matches, for every match like that, I would watch like 100 matches to try to see what's going on, try to figure it out. I got lucky enough early on that Jeff Walton, who was the announcer and the publicity guy for the Olympic Auditorium, we became friends. I used to send him a quarter every week, and he would send me the program from the Olympic. And Jeff often said that without that quarter, he would never have survived. But he appreciated it anyway. So, but I started talking to him, and he felt comfortable enough, and he knew that I was respectful, and that's a big thing in professional wrestling or in anything you do in life. If somebody feels that you respect what they do or what you do, they'll be willing to talk to you. I have no trouble talking to people who speak to me respectfully about it. They're not there to make fun of it or not there
Hmm.
to degrade it or whatever. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you in that situation. And Jeff did that for me. I would ask questions of him, and he would answer. Then one time at another wrestling match, I met an old timer named Red Bastine, and Red
Hmm.
Bastine was a great guy, and we started talking. We started running into each other because I started going to the Cauliflower Alley. So they would see you. And once you were kind of inside the door of Cauliflower Alley, you were very respected among the other people there. They figured you needed to be there. You should be there, or they wouldn't talk to you. But Red he would answer questions. I would say, Red, why do they do this? Why do you do that? And that's
Hmm.
how I first learned. Um, I never had the coordination to be a professional wrestler. That's the only thing that's kept me from being world champion, is the fact that I have no physical skills at all in that. I've tried. I've taken classes. I learned when I was a referee how to bump a little bit, as they say, and how to do that. But I wasn't. I was very sickly when I was born, and I almost died. So because of that, it threw off my coordination for years. When I would have to go out in the yard with my father, and my dad would throw a ball back and forth with me just so I could learn how to catch, because I kept doing
Hmm.
this, all the
Hmm.
time. So I said, well, I like wrestling. I never figured I would be in it. I did some writing for magazines and newsletters and stuff. But a guy named Johnny Legend, who's a very wild
Hmm.
and colorful guy who was friends with Andy Kaufman, um, basically was doing a show and asked me to help. So I became the guy that worked behind the scenes, which I was really happy with. I would run the dressing room, which I really enjoyed. I would book sometimes. I would make sure the guys got to the ring and back, and all that stuff. And then also a lot of other guys then started hiring me because they saw me working elsewhere. And little by little, eventually I broke in as a referee and refereed matches for guys up and coming and future superstars like Samoa Joe and Adam Pearce and guys like that. I
Hmm.
got a chance to work with Sabu, Dan Severin, Terry Funk, a lot of guys like that. And you learn as you learn all the time. You never stop learning if you're smart in life. Opera singers, um, even big names who sell out coliseums and whatever, they still take vocal lessons on Saturdays. They
That's
call it
right.
eternal student, and we should all be eternal students. And
I
always,
love that.
you never cannot learn enough. You never can. You never go. Despite what some wrestlers will tell you, no, I've learned enough. I don't need to learn anything else. But no, you can always learn something else, because
Yeah.
that's what I always did. I always trusted, and working in MPW and other groups, there were guys there that I respected and that I knew, and I would talk to them and say, okay, well, what can you do? What can we do here? What can we do there?
Hmm.
And other guys that work behind the scenes. I mean, that's the fun part. It's like I consider what I did in professional wrestling. I was a cook. I helped make the meal, and then I sat back and watched everybody eat it.
Well, and what I loved about professional wrestling is that I learned that very quickly, that everybody in the locker room, everybody in the building had a job and had a part in making the show successful, right? Whether it was the bookers, the writers, ring crew,
Hmm.
the referees. There was just so much that goes into the show, and everybody has their part. I mean, even the fans. I mean, without the fans, there's no show, right?
Oh
So I
yeah.
mean, there's so much to it. But I have to say, I do remember on one show, you mentioned not being a wrestler per se, but I do remember the last show at the Boys and Girls Club at Simi Valley. You left as the MPW World Champion. Is that not correct?
Yes, that is correct on paper and in the record books. I have to tell you, my old school friends that I've known for years, who were wrestlers and whatever, have never let me live that down. They go, oh, so you were the booker, and guess who became the world champion on the last show? It was you.
well, and I
Yeah.
know that you did not make that decision.
No, and actually, if you talked, and I think it was Ken Knapsack who said when Paul Logan X went to him and said, we're gonna make the champion Dan." He said he's never going to do that, and he said, "Well, we're going to make him do that." He said, "You better
Right.
hold him down really hard because he's going to fight you to the end of it." And I remember that it was so funny. I did my little spot because we were all doing little spots, and all of a
Right.
sudden I was like under a dog pile, and Paul just said, "Stay there." And I tried to scoot out. I really did because I just didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. But it was a nice honor, and I appreciate the respect that I got from the guys.
I remember that show very distinctly for a couple of reasons. Number one, it was very early when I started wrestling. I think it was probably it was in my top 10 matches,
Yeah,
but that was when MPW was the going out of business show
yeah,
before we ended up opening again for about the 50th time.
yeah.
But on that particular show, for those that know me well, I had a major injury that
Hmm.
night. Ryan Morals, I dislocated my shoulder about 30 seconds before the finish. And I remember it happening. And oh my God, it was the worst pain I was ever in. And I just looked at him and he's like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "We're going home right now." And I just did
Hmm.
my super kick and done. I remember rolling to the edge of the ring. And you talk about like how everybody has a part in the show. I couldn't believe how many people just from the ring crew that were right there, just
Hmm.
fans that literally showed genuine concern. I also remember very distinctly how um, disappointed, I guess to put it lightly, my wife was
Yeah.
that evening. But we ended
Yes.
up leaving. So I missed
Oh,
you getting the strap. I missed Topher his match. I missed so much because I was at the hospital.
well, you do remember who got to be the lucky guy to go out and tell your wife that you were
Was that
injured,
you?
don't you? That was me, and I have
Mm,
I have been in the ring with Sabu, and I was never more scared than I was when I saw her reaction to, "Can you come back to the dressing room?" And she's like, "He's hurt, isn't he? He's hurt, isn't he?" And I said, "Just come back to the dressing room, okay? Please don't hit me. I'm just the messenger in the situation." Yeah. No, I mean, you're lucky in that situation. I have a friend who broke his arm in his very first match, and I
mm,
always feel, and I'm sure that there was part of you that when this happened, you looked at it and said, "Do I really want to be doing this? Am I, will the bumps and the bruises and the bones eventually, you only have so many punches on the bunch guard, on the bump guard,
that's right. That's
so
right.
there's only so long you can do it." And my friend who broke his arm, he thought about it, and he eventually went back. And I was very happy to see that you went back to it. But what will happen eventually to you? I'm 66 now. I get up some mornings and my hip hurts. I go, "Oh, that was Pomona." I remember them by cities.
Uh-huh.
"Oh, that was Moore Park." Yeah, that was that. So,
That's
but
for sure.
yeah, that was. I'm sorry you missed it that night, but I'm especially sorry that you hurt yourself. That
I saw the pictures. I saw the posts on social media. I do remember also distinctly that in the hospital, as soon as I had it put back in, we were driving in the car on the way home. I said, "Can we go back and just kind of see the end of the show?" She laughed at me. She's like, "Get out of here, get
yeah,
out of here."
that's a wife.
Hey,
That's a good wife.
so you mentioned you brought up the cauliflower alley, and a
Yeah.
lot of people watching may not be professional wrestling fans or have any idea what that event is.
That's
I
right.
have yet to go ever in my life, and I've always said I wanted to go. But can you talk about that event and just some of the
Oh yeah.
experiences that you've
Um,
had?
just in the last month, we went to Cauliflower Alley. I was lucky enough to start going in the early '90s, and then it was in Studio City here in California, and then it traveled on the road for a while, settling into Las Vegas. Um, I see Kim came through. Okay.
That's my mom. That's my mom, not
Oh,
my
your
wife.
mom.
But
Okay. All right. But still, but yeah, that's good. Still, it's good to get a thumbs up from mom. I'm always
that's
happy
right.
for that.
Always.
Always. But I started going to it over and over again over the years. And
Hmm.
I got to tell you about my wife for a second. My wife was not a wrestling fan. She didn't dislike it, but she didn't know that I was interested in wrestling because I
Hmm.
never brought it up when we were dating. For 5 years, I never brought it up. So all of a sudden, we get married, and I start talking to her about wrestling. And I took her down to the sports arena to see an old show with Bob Backlund and Ivan Koloff and those guys on it. And Ivan Koloff got busted open. And I walked her over. And what I said to her originally was, I said, now look, if you feel uncomfortable at any time, just tell me and we'll go. But she kind of enjoyed the she was a drama student. She was a
Hmm.
teacher, so she loves that whole colorful bit of there. So we walked on over, and Ivan Koloff, and this was before they put the metal barriers up. They just had rope on a stanchion going
Mm.
across. And as we got close to it, as Ivan Koloff got close to it, the crowd surged behind me, and they kind of pushed us forward. She will swears to this day, like 30 years after this, that I tried to push her into Ivan Koloff. That was farthest thing from my intention. But she will still. I mean, right now she's watching this at home. She's screaming that into the Twitter machine here. But that's what she did. But I actually converted her into a wrestling fan. Um, I remember sometimes when I was a referee, I would take a bump, and I would hear my wife in the audience yell, "Serves you right." You know, uh, she loved doing that part. But she goes. I have to say, because she goes to Cauliflower every year. She can't wait for Cauliflower Alley every year. She has gone to Cauliflower Alley on her birthday. She has gone on our anniversary. So I turned her into a big fan. But we go there. It's a convention for 3 days. Cauliflower Alley. What it does is it raises money for older wrestlers who may be in financial trouble, have have physical problems, and it gives them money to try to help them go on. B. Brian Blair from the Killer Bees is the current
Hmm.
president, and it's a nice nonprofit, and all the money and all the dues go to helping people like Kamala and other wrestlers who fall on hard times. So they helped him for the last few months of his life, and I would say that anybody who is a wrestling fan, or if you are a wrestler, even if you don't go, it's $25 a year to be a member. Um, do a nice deal for the guys that came before you. And even if you don't go, you get a nice little newsletter, and maybe you could go to Vegas and see it because we have a great time. I have friends for 30 years that the only time we ever get together is there. And
Hmm.
it's you talk about the brotherhood of wrestling. You really feel that because as we all get older, we hug each other goodbye a little bit longer because you never know these days. So, but we just came back, and there was Jerry Lawler, and there was Jeff Jarrett, and Rey Mysterio, who I knew and booked on some matches when he was 16 years old, and Conan, who's another old friend of mine. And it was a chance to see them again and get pictures with them and visit with
Hmm.
them. And the Rock and Roll Express was there. So it's a good time. And I really look it up, Cauliflower Alley Club. Become a member, or maybe even come out to the convention. There'll be another one next year. It really is worth it. You should come out, Jason. You have a good time.
Well, Paul has asked me to go a couple times, and a couple of the other guys, Whiskey and Ernie, they all kind of go together. And there was one
Mm-hmm.
year right before, I think it was right before COVID, that I was all set to go, and I forget what changed schedule wise, but yeah,
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of fun, and I would definitely be interested in going. And it's just so neat to hear you talk about all these people, these wrestlers that we grew up in different eras,
Mm-hmm.
obviously.
Yeah.
And I want to get to a question about that. But by the way, those
Sure.
of you that are watching, guys, if you're watching this live and you're a pro wrestling fan, or you have questions about the old days, someone said, I love MPW history. If you want to hear something more in detail, please let us know. If you're watching, just let us know that you're watching.
Yeah.
Drop your name so we can see who's out there. Um, so,
Yeah.
Dan, what I was saying,
No, I go back to 1971, and actually, because I am fascinated. I do a lot of wrestling history, writing and research too. So yeah, I'm literally, as my wife will tell you, I can't shut up about the stuff. So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, so growing up around the 70s era and
Mhm.
coming into the 80s, the 90s. I mean, my question is, what has changed so dramatically in professional wrestling, and what has remained the same in your opinion?
Oh, everything all at once, all
Is
together.
Danny?
That's true. Hey, Danny. Um, uh, when I first went, it was small arenas. The Olympic Auditorium held about 1,100 people. They did a Coliseum show, which drew more than that. But in general, it was a slower build. It was weekly in many cases. So it's like having a home team. Now the WWE or AEW, they'll show up like once every twice a year or whatever. But I had them there every week. I
Hmm.
could go and see Andre the Giant or see. The first time I ever saw Andre the Giant, I walked into the arena and he had gone to get coffee for the locker room, and he had a styrofoam cup of coffee between each of the fingers on his hand. He was carrying five back in each hand like that, and it made me. That's my favorite time for wrestling because that's when, um, you always when you were a kid, you always are most excited about wrestling, and that's when it was new and it was like a brand new toy. And
Hmm.
eventually, it's like everything else, you get a toy and it gets beat up and it gets broken after a while, but you still like playing with it. It's not the same reaction to you had before. But
Hmm.
I was there to watch the tail end of the territory days, and then into the 1980s is when it became corporate. Now all of a sudden you have Hulkamania because of cable TV and the internet. So I could see matches from all over the place. So you could turn on TV, like a local UHF station on a Saturday afternoon, and it might be 5 hour block of wrestling from all over the place. So I saw that change. I also saw people began to talk more about wrestling, and also it was because of the WWE, there was less concern about was it real, was it not real, which is always to me was one of the stupidest things. It didn't matter if it was real or not real. The guys that do it are tremendously talented, and they deserve, they do something that none of us can do, and they need to be given credit for that, not these silly things, because I mean, if you go back to the 1940s and 50s, you read old magazines, they're making references. How we always talk about like the guys in the old days, from my generation, will make fun of the guys now. Well, when I was in the 1970s at the San Bernardino Arena, the people there used to say to me, "Oh, sure, this guy's great. Roddy Piper's great, but you should have seen Gorgeous George." So that's always the situation. They're always going to go back to their time, place, and
Hmm.
period.
Hmm.
But I watched a change in that, and I watched it become big business and a corporation and something that I would never have guessed. And all of a sudden, there was merchandising. I mean, the most merchandising you might get when I was around was programs, maybe photos, and maybe a T-shirt. But now there's everything, and everywhere you go, it still is out there. And
Hmm.
it's just, imagine, it's become this gigantic corporate entity, which
Hmm.
is good sometimes and it's bad sometimes. I mean, back in the old days, the promoters ran it; they did whatever they wanted to. They didn't care about anybody else. Now you got stockholders and people like that, and
Hmm.
networks that are going to critique you and tell you how to do it and add extra partners in there. So,
Hmm.
yeah, it's been wild for 40 some odd years. Watching this, and watching the change in it. And as I said to, here, I'll drop a name for a second. As I said to Cowboy Bob Orton just a month ago, I said, "I've been around so long. I saw your father wrestle, and I watched your son wrestle." And he goes, "You feel really old, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I feel really old."
Wow, that's amazing. Hey, let me give a shout out real quick. Shihan Dana Abbott is watching, who will be our guest next week on Master Motivation. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate you being here. And if you have any questions about pro wrestling, please let us know. And I'm going to put this one back up there because I didn't know right away that it was Danny. I don't know why it says Facebook user sometimes, but he says thanks for paving the way for MPW. They're still going strong. I mean, you talked
Yep.
about weekly shows at the Olympic Auditorium. I mean,
Hmm.
MPW has been
They're
running
doing weekly shows now.
every Friday for several years. And I have to say that I was a little skeptical on how that was going to work out. And being in Moore Park, it was kind of a different deal. But When we moved out to Chatsworth, I mean, it's just exploded. And
Yeah.
Danny and Brendan and a lot of the guys have really taken it to a whole new level. I think that the whole environment of MPW has just been enhanced to an amazing level. I continue to watch it, although I'm not on the show as frequent as I would like. But gosh,
Yeah.
what an amazing group of talent that they've got going on over there. You know, for you being in the SoCal area, right?
Hmm.
You've watched a lot of these, we'll just say kids, right, grow up.
Yeah.
I mean, you had. I mean, you could name all the names of people that you've seen that have come up from the different promotions and the different groups out there. Who are some of the ones that you remember coming up in the SoCal scene?
Oh, geez. I first started refereeing full time around 1990. So at that time, we had Samoa Joe, we had B Boy. Uh, the first MPW main event that I was the commissioner for was Frankie Kazarian, um, Adam Pierce, and Christopher Daniels.
Right.
And Spanky, who or Brian Kendrick, as he was called
Hmm.
back then. So I mean, I worked with a lot of those guys, a lot of the Lucha guys. Like I said, I first saw Rey Mysterio Jr. when he was 16 years old. He'd been in the business about 6 months. It was at a bingo hall in Santa Ana. He was working the opening match. He was still green, uh, and he was wrestling against a guy named guy who eventually becomes Psychoses, but
Hmm.
they wrestled a lot in tag because they were getting seasoning, and it was a very small building, and Psychoses went up to the top rope and jumped off the top rope and put his head through the ceiling tile on the way down. So that gives you an idea how much small these are. But these places were small, and I got to know them. And I remember we did a show. We were one of the first shows. We were Hollywood Heavyweight Wrestling. Myself and Johnny Legend and Danny Wolf. We promoted a show in January of 1990, and it was the first show that they had done in California, independent show that was done without a license. Previously, the state athletic commission wanted a license, and they wanted that. So they lifted that. So we were the first guys out there, and Conan brought Ray up, who was 16. He couldn't drive. I mean, he had to come up. We did another bar show with him. We told him to leave his mask on, and we had to tell the owners of the bar that he was a mini wrestler, a midget wrestler, to make sure that they didn't realize, that he was underage. But I remember him working in the first match, and I said to Conan, I said, Carlos, this guy is really, really good. I said, what should we pay him? And Carlos said, give him $10. I don't want him to get a big head. So basically, I paid the future WWE World Champion $10 to work in an opening match for me. So I mean, it was fun. And Conan's another guy who was just breaking in and used to send me tapes to send to people, trying to get work. Oh gosh, I remember Logan X when he was a young punk, and well, some people think he still is, but no, I remember him in fact, the very first MPW show they put on. He and Barry Cohen will both tell you they had Psychosis scheduled for the show,
Uh huh.
and he had to back out the last minute, and they were freaking out about what to do. And I said, it's really simple. Put a sign up saying he's not going to be here, so that way nobody pays and comes inside and finds out he's not there later. But I worked a lot with them when they first came out to tell them, what to do and how not. What I always tried to tell them, Jason, always is make it simple. If people are coming to watch you live, um, they can see the fancy stuff, the backstage stuff, the videos and stuff at home when they watch WWE or NWA then whatever. I said make it like really fast paced and really hard and fast, and this is the biggest thing I've always had trouble with. I am a stickler for time.
Mm.
My father raised me to be if you're on time, you're already 15 minutes late. I was always I just vehement about being on time. And the big curse there is virtually everyone I know in every profession, including my wife and best friends, all are always late, always late. My wife will always joke, with the old saying, always late but worth the wait. I said, don't test that. Don't test that. But a lot of the guys would come in, late, and it would be something that you have to learn how to do that. And one drove me crazy with some cards and MPW I loved working for, but sometimes there was an effort to want to put everybody in, and I understand that. But I can watch an audience face. If I see kids hanging on the rail, I know they're getting tired. So I'm
Hmm.
always a big stickler about 8 matches are about fine, and they start low and they go up in time. Because I've seen shows that I've gone to some of the one of the some shows that go on till 1 o'clock in the morning, and you're just killing your crowd, and you're not doing anything for the guys coming at the end of the match. Especially,
Right.
I refereed a match one time between Two Cold Scorpio and Chris Benoit in out in Pomona. And what happened was the guys that put it on sold their baseball cards so they could put this big show on, so they could hire big names to be in the main event. So what they did was they put themselves on early in the show, and the first match was they were in a tag team match, and it went on for 30 minutes. 30 long,
Mm.
laborious minutes. And I remember one wrestler to me and says, "Well, I don't have to do that much now because they've seen everything already. They've done every move there is."
Right.
But by the end of the evening, when you had these names like Two Gold Scorpio there and whatever, and Al Snow, people were leaving because they were tired and it was getting late. So you have to learn how to pace the show.
Yeah.
And that's what always drove me crazy. You used to see me pace back and forth, and some started to get a little long. I'd start wandering out and
Hmm.
wandering down to ringside. Come on, boys, let's wrap this up. Let's go. We don't want to lose the audience.
Well, you're talking to a martial artist when it comes to the time thing. I can't tell you how
Mhm.
many times I tell my students, right? If you're
Yeah,
on time, you're already late.
yeah,
Just be
exactly.
here, 15 to 20 minutes early. Hey, shout out to TJ. TJ Williams is watching. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Still recovering from knee surgery while listening to this episode. So ready to get back into the ring, but I have to get healed first. And I
Yeah,
hope you heal fast. Get healed completely before
yeah.
you get back in the ring. But hey, TJ, do you have any questions for Dan or Danny? If you're still watching, Dana, if you're still out there, if you guys have any questions, because we might be moving on to a new topic here in just a second. But Dan, any other experiences with pro wrestling that you want to talk about or just share with the audience?
Um, Boy, I will tell you flat out, I love wrestling. I always joke about it, saying that I have a love-hate relationship with it because sometimes I love it and it hates me. I promoted and worked on a lot of shows. Sometimes you get very disappointed, but that's part of the stuff that I've learned in life as I get older. Is that I look back at the old stuff, and while I could. I was hard on a lot of the guys. I could be because I had certain way that I wanted it done, and I couldn't understand why they wouldn't. But I have kind of eased up and mellowed in my older years now, and I do understand you're that age. You want to get out there. I used to have guys. So when do I get my big break? When do I get my big break? And I would point to the promoter and say, when he tells me you get your big break, that's when you get your big break. But I learned so much from wrestling that I've taken into life itself. I mean, we talked about walking through the dressing room and shaking hands. I
Hmm.
firmly believe that's something that you should do in all points of your life. I mean, and on jobs, on when I used to do this freelance security, the first thing I would do was walk through, shake everybody's hand, say hi, introduce myself to them. The same thing I used to do with the guys in the locker room. At the end of the evening, I thank them for coming out, thank them for
Hmm.
working hard. Maybe all they're going to get is my handshake and a hot dog, but at least thank you for coming out and working hard and doing this and putting your body on the line. I mean, I think that's something that needs to be done. The other thing that I always like to try to convince younger guys to do is to know when to get out of the ring and give the ring to somebody else. If you have someone who wins a match, it's a big match, it's a big deal, and it's been built up or whatever. When I was refereeing, I'd raise the guy's hand, then I would roll out. So that way he can have the ring to himself. He can feel the adulation of the crowd, and those are kind of things that you take from professional wrestling,
Hmm.
and that you basically can apply to your real life and do that. I mean, everything I've learned in life, I've learned through professional wrestling. Really
Yeah.
have.
No, so much of it. And when I broke in to the business, as we say, I came in with a lot of this, martial arts, the tradition of martial arts and professional wrestling go so hand in hand. Like you
Yeah.
said, the respect coming in, we come in and shake hands, but in the martial arts school, we come in and we bow to everybody. We bow when we
Right.
come in the ring or we come onto our mat. The respect that we show one another, everybody is on the same team. looking each other in the eyes, being able to trust each other, that camaraderie. It's probably one of the things that I enjoyed the most about being in the
Yeah.
locker room was the camaraderie and the relationships. As I said, Danny Devine and Brendan, two really good friends that I met and forged this bond through professional wrestling. And
Yeah.
it just that goes such a long way,
Yeah.
even much later in life. Like you say, you have a lot of friends that you see at Cauliflower Alley that you may only see them once a year, and that's your reunion time.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I've always admired about martial arts also. And I know that it's not always that way in professional wrestling. I mean, if sometimes if you had a guy come in who wasn't respectful or whatever, you're going to straighten him out real quick. That's going to happen real quick. And I always felt the same way. If I yelled in the locker room, and that's the only place in my life I ever really would get mad, it was because
Uh-huh.
somebody was being disrespectful or somebody was, there's a lot of guys that came before you who gave their lives for this.
Hmm.
And the thing about it is, you make these friendships, like you said, that you keep
Hmm.
for your entire life. They're so important.
Hmm.
And you met some guys also. I brought in with me some guys when I came to NPW that broke in with me, or I known for like 10 years or whatever. And I brought them in because they were open to working with younger guys. They didn't mind doing a job, losing. They didn't mind
Hmm.
any of that stuff. They just wanted to come in and help and give back. And that's what I always wanted to do. Is I always like to give back the best I can, whether it's letting people know about old wrestlers that aren't around or whatever, or people they should go. I would see people wrestlers, and I would say to them, you should go watch matches of this guy or that guy,
Hmm. Hmm.
just to get an idea how to do that. And that's always a really important part. I mean, respect in life. I mean, you got to have respect in life for everybody and everything. I mean, if you're not, life's going to kick you in the ass real hard.
One of my favorite things in my martial arts training was the times that I got to sit and listen to my instructor tell stories about, quote unquote, the old days, or the guys that came
Hmm.
before us, the guys that competed, the guys that trained. And what a treat for a lot of the guys that got to be in the locker room when you were there to
Oh,
tell
thank
those
you.
stories. I think that a lot of whether it's a younger wrestler, a younger martial artist, or just the younger generation, could really learn a lot, rather than thinking that we know it all and then we can do it our way and our way is better, right? Because we've all thought that at some point or another. But we can really learn a lot from those that have
Yeah.
come before us, and you learn a lot about what you should do. And at the same time, you were talking about certain people in the locker room that you just kind of watching. Not everybody was respectful. I mean, I can very distinctly remember a couple people that were just not on that level, but it reminded me of the fact that I didn't want to be that person. When I became a
Yeah.
trainer at MPW, I wanted to make everybody that stepped foot in that ring feel good about being there. And
Hmm.
and just like I would with my martial arts students, give them the confidence to move to that next level. Because let's face it, half the people that step in the ring um, don't have the goal of going to WWE or
Right.
AEW or going to the higher level. I mean, I didn't even start until I was 38 years old. I had no aspirations at that point in my life. But you get to live out a dream, and
Yeah.
and who are you to crush somebody's dreams that gets in there and crap all over them,
Yeah.
or on the opposite end, the young talent that comes in and doesn't listen to the trainers and think that because they've had 10 or 15 matches, or they've been wrestling for a year, that they know it all, because at that point they don't know shit. they
Yeah.
they need to they need to listen to their trainers and learn from the people that have been there before them. So again, I
Yeah.
just think what a unique opportunity for those people that got to listen to you. And I'm kind of excited. I get a little giddy and kind of a mark to hear all the old stories of wrestlers I watched on TV and wrestlers that I wanted to emulate. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat was probably my
Yeah.
biggest influence, just because he was, in a sense, he portrayed a martial artist in the ring. Any experience with him?
Actually, he is one of my wife's favorite wrestlers,
Hmm.
and he showed up at Cauliflower Alley one time, and she has a picture with him. And I used to always joke with her, I bet, about a lot of the wrestlers that would come up with the old wrestlers to see Mary Lou, because my wife is very, very cute. And that is, they would hug them. And sometimes they would hug her a little too long. You start, okay, we're going to let go now. This is not a bear hug. Let's go. But she grabbed Ricky Steamboat. And I thought she was going to scare him half to death at first, but he is the nicest guy. He is just, never worked with him, met him several times. Anytime you can watch a shoot interview or anything with him, you got to do it, because I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I mean. And for me, it was the same way when I first started going to stuff like a Cauliflower Alley. All of a sudden, I'm in a room with Lou Thez. I'm in a room with Vern Gagne. I'm in the room with Dr. Jerry Graham. All these famous, great wrestlers. Kenji Shibuya, guys that I saw as a kid. And when I would get around them, sometimes I would be quiet because I was still a little. I sat one time and listened to a guy named Jesse James talk. And Jesse James had wrestled Gorgeous George in the 1950s. And this is one of the things I say to guys sometimes. I said, when someone starts talking, don't say anything. You're there to listen and to learn. A couple of years ago at Cauliflower Alley, there was a lady wrestler named Sandy Parker, who I used to see wrestle in the 70s. And she came in and she looked familiar. She had a cane and she looked a little familiar. And I went to one of the guys and said, "Is that Sandy Parker?" And they said, "Yeah." And he goes, "You should go over and say something to her." And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. I feel I don't want to interrupt her or whatever." He goes, "Trust me, she would love it." And she went over, she was talking to a guy named Dean Silverstone, who was a treasurer for Cauliflower. He's unfortunately passed away, but he was a promoter in Oregon. And they were sitting down talking. I said, "Can I interrupt you? Can I get a picture with you?" And we took a picture together. And so she said, "Sit down." And I sat down, and for a half hour, Jason, I didn't say a word. I just sat there and listened to them talk about the 1970s and the 60s and all about so and so and my son. And that's one of my favorite times at Cauliflower Alley. Was not a gigantic party or whatever, that kind of thing. It was just sitting with two old pros who were before my time and listening to it. And there's not a lot of people before my time anymore. So it's really nice to do that. But the nice thing about it is the guys always did at MPW push respect. And if guys didn't have respect, they didn't stay long. But I mean, that's one of the things also is that, again, you learn from watching. When I first started doing MCs on different shows and different type of stuff, I would watch the MC, and a guy told me, a very wise guy told me one time, watch what they do that's a mistake. You'll be able to tell. You'll be able to figure it out. Like, for example, if you're doing a stand-up comedy show and the guy goes up and he does great, then bring somebody else up real quick because the audience is primed, they're hot. Bring somebody else up. Don't start telling your own jokes because you may kill the audience at that point. You're going to ruin it for the guys following you. And if you're hosting and a guy does not do well, then get up there and joke a little bit or talk to them or whatever and try to get them back, on the laughing side. Get a laugh. And once you got a laugh, then you can give them to the next guy. I mean, that's why you see a lot of people in comedy and wrestling go back and forth in that, because there's a lot of it that really rides the same plane. It really does.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, it's so great to just hear you talk a little bit. When I was a kid, I did not like history per se in school, although now I
Mhm.
absolutely love it. But I've always loved storytelling. I think that's what drew me into wrestling in general, because that's what wrestling is. Wrestling is storytelling. That's
Yep.
what made it so fun to tune into the next week or tune into the next show or get ready for the pay-per-view, because they had this big buildup. But listening to you tell stories, and I would always ask my father or my grandparents, tell me about this or tell me about that kind of history, because now I can share that. That's one of the great things about this podcast really is that these stories that are being told here will now be able to be shared forever with people that
Mm-hmm.
will tune in and watch it. And one of the things that I figured out after doing a bunch of them is I thought to myself, gosh, my kids will get to know some really cool people that I got
Mm-hmm.
to interact with in my life just through their opportunity to tell their story. So thank you for
Yeah.
sharing all of that.
Oh, you're welcome. I have to tell you, that's really funny sometimes. I had a guy named Alex Knight who I did a lot of shows with in the 1990s. And he walked up in Cauliflower Alley out of nowhere and gave me a DVD that had a whole bunch of stuff that he did, and that I did ring announcing for him. And all of a
Mm-hmm.
sudden, here's 35-year-old me with brown hair again. And I'm watching these shows. And it was like, and I didn't even realize at the time, the great Goliath, who was a great wrestler out here, and he and Black Gordman were one of my favorite tag teams. I didn't know it at the time, but I got to ring announce his last match. I got to introduce him in the ring for the very last time. He retired after that. And I was so touched and honored by that. I'm a sentimental old Irishman. I mean, it takes very little to make me cry. But I got all choked up over that. I met Pepper Martin a couple of years ago, Dana. I saw it, and now I saw Haystack Calhoun wrestle, but I did meet Pepper Martin. He has a really good autobiography out, and we got to Cauliflower Alley after driving for 5.5 hours, and we were running late. And I actually, when we got inside, I left the bags out front with friends, and I ran upstairs to get Pepper Martin to autograph a copy of his autobiography. And he was a very nice man. I got to talk to him a couple more years before he passed away. But I mean, that's, it's all about the excitement. If you're not going to enjoy something, I meet a lot of wrestlers sometimes that all they do is complain about it. If you're not going to enjoy it, don't do it. I mean,
Right.
it's not worth doing, and we got to keep these stories going because they do die out with each generation that goes away. I like, for example, now I tell them this stuff here, like you said, this will be here, but also you've heard the stories and you'll pass them on to another generation
Mm-hmm.
and add to them. And that's the whole thing about it. I mean, storytelling is such an important part of life. My father was a great storyteller. I mean, he told me stories about working in a drugstore when World War II was going on, and how he had to get back before the curfew went in, and how he would run down the side streets so the cops wouldn't see him. Or all these things that I didn't know about, and it was really important for me because my father had Alzheimer's for 17 years, and my father was one of my mentors and one of my idols. He was best man at our wedding, and he was somebody, a very special part of my life. And I used to sit there on the floor, and he would show me old movies with Humphrey Bogart and whatever. And that's how I became a movie buff. And then also, he would tell me these stories about when he was growing up as a kid. And now I can research stuff on newspapers.com and stuff and find the things that he talked about. But I used to remember my greatest memories were sitting, and he's been gone about 10 years ago. And as I always say, gone for 10 years, but never forgotten, but always nearby. I used to say all the time, and I talked a lot about my father with other people's sharing stories, and they would share them with me too.
Mm-hmm.
But I always said that as my father forgot, I remembered, and that he passed these stories on to me, and that's really, really important. I mean, that's it's life. It's just
Yeah,
it's something.
that's so
Yeah.
cool. That's so cool. You talk about your father being a mentor to you. Who are
Mhm.
some other mentors to you? Not necessarily just in the professional wrestling world, but who are some mentors that kind of help bring you up?
Oftentimes with some mentors, if you mention to them that they're mentors, they get a little nervous. That is,
Mm-hmm.
they feel like it's a heavy responsibility. So
Mm-hmm.
I've had a lot of mentors who were people that maybe I never got a chance to say that to, but they were. When I was in college, like I said, I've been a writer. I was a writer as a kid. I always wanted to be a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a couple. I had a guy named Milton Gelman who was an old time writer from the 50s and the 70s. And he would sit in class and tell us these stories. And you couldn't smoke in the class at that time, but he would just hold an unlit cigarette and tell stories about working on The Man from Uncle or working on all these old classic TV shows or these movies. I had another great mentor named Dr. Carolyn C., who actually I've become friends with her daughter. She was a wonderful writer and taught me so much about writing. And in turn, you take this stuff and you when you take it, you learn to say thank you. One of the biggest things that she ever taught, she wrote a book called How to Be a Writer. And in it, she said that she felt that you should write a letter to somebody that you admire that you don't know every day and mail it to them. Don't expect a reply, but let them know that thank you. That this is a way of thanking you for all that you've done. And that's something that I took to heart in the last couple of years, especially going through the pandemic when there was all the
Mm-hmm.
illness and the sudden death that was going on. But my wife and I started going to horror conventions and comic book shows and wrestling conventions and whatever. And we would go and we would find somebody that we saw as a kid growing up, and we would thank them. I said, I'm here to get a picture with you, and I also want to thank you. Thank you for all the enjoyment that you gave to me. And just a good example, there was a 70s exploitation actor named Austin Stoker who was in John Carpenter's Assault on Precinct 13. Great movie. I fully recommend it.
Mhm.
He passed away last week at age 90. We saw him a year ago. And I walked up to him and said, I want to thank you. I said, and I started naming all these movies. He goes, wait a minute, those, the Sheba Baby, all these, you went to see those movies? I said, yeah. I said, I was a white boy in the suburbs who snuck downtown to see your movies. Is what I did. And he started laughing, and we talked for about 15, 20 minutes. And he passed away. But again, those 15, 20 minutes, I got to tell him how much that he meant to me, and he got to
Mhm.
hear it from me. And that's something really, really important to do. I make sure I always thank everyone. Even in Vegas when we were up there, I went up to the security guards there and say, look, I do security too. It's a crappy job. No one appreciates it. But I want to tell you that I appreciate what you're doing. And I think that's something that you can do to people in life. Again, it's like walking around the dressing room shaking hands. uh, Thank people, let them know that they mean something to you. We go to see, and we'll see actors that I grew up on watching, or baseball players, or wrestlers. I saw Jerry Jarrett, Jeff Jarrett's father, at Cauliflower Alley, who was a promoter. And we talked for a few minutes, and afterwards I said, thank you. I said, you brought a lot of pleasure into my life, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Never taken, never, Adam Pierce always writes, say, tell somebody you love them today. And I always believe that, tell somebody thank you today. Thank you for going out of your way, because, world can be a cold, hard place sometimes. And you might say something just in passing that you forget, but that might mean something to that person for a long, long time.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking about professional wrestling, for the majority of this time, but I think just in this last 1 minute, you probably gave the best piece of advice and something that everybody can take away from that, because that goes above and beyond a smile that could change someone's day or change
Yeah.
someone's attitude, but really just that power of saying thank you and giving your appreciation. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a really great lesson to share with everybody today.
Yeah.
I did want
And
to ask. Go
Jason,
ahead.
I do want to say one thing, because in the ads leading up to this, I don't want to promo something that not deliver. Change is neither good nor bad. It just is. You got to be flexible enough in life. This is the big things I learned to be able to make a change, to pivot real quick if you have to. Some people I see, they move their desk at work, they freak out for 3 weeks after that. Be open to change. You can't do anything about it. It's always going to happen that way. Learn from it. Um, don't make excuses for it. Just learn from it and be open to change. And I say that in no matter what your job. I don't care if you're an executive someplace, or if you're just a guy working in a feed and grain store. Always be open to that. So I wanted to get that in before. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, no, that's a well. So two things. One, because you brought that up and you talked about the kind of promo. Tell me about that first line. Dan Farren eats life in
Eats
big
life in big
bites.
bites. Yeah. I stole that from David Crosby from Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. And that is that my life has, like a lot of people, hasn't always been easy. And I find at 66, I've done a lot of things and had a lot of loss, and a lot of things that you would feel that you would start to have at this point in your life. But I have decided that looking back, while I haven't always made the right choice, I made the choice that was best for me. And in that, I say all the time, I do what I please, and I'm pleased with what I do. And that is that, you go around one time. This is another story you can get into. I've almost died 3 times. I mean, 3 times, very, very. I had renal failure. My kidneys failed on Christmas night. There's a gift for you that keeps giving. But I was able to work through that, and things are better now, and I'm doing well. But it made me appreciate life more. It made me appreciate, like I said, thanking people and doing all that stuff. You got to
Mm-hmm.
be. I haven't eaten red meat in 3 years. I would kill for an In-N-Out burger, but still, I'm not doing it because the doctor doesn't want me to. So you got to be ready to make a change. You got to be ready to do what's best for you. And also, in turn, when you do what's best for you, you're doing what's best for the people that are in your life.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. Well, we're getting near the end of our time here today. And anybody that's still watching, I know there's several of you still out there. If you have any comments or questions that you want to leave us with today, anything you want us to finish up with. But, Dan, it's just such a pleasure to hear, just your experience, your stories. Thank you for being open to sharing, because not everybody is open to sharing their story.
I know.
Everybody
I
kind of
know.
keeps that story to themselves. But I think that everybody can take something away from what we've talked about today. And I hope that you guys have enjoyed watching the show as much as I've enjoyed listening to Dan. So, with that, I will say once again, thank you, Dan. Thank you for
You're
sharing the
welcome,
story. And
Jason.
thank you for keeping, that spirit of pro wrestling alive still, and having such a big part of it. Thank you. We didn't even get to talk about your writing. I apologize, but maybe
That's
we
okay.
can we
I
can
can
have a
come
part
back
two.
again. I
We
can
could
come
do it
back
again.
again.
That's
I'm
right.
not retired yet. I'm close to it, but I'm not retired yet. Anytime you want me, let me know.
All right. Well, that sounds great. Well, listen, guys, please make sure to tune in every Monday right here on YouTube or any of the other social media channels that you're on. Next week, we have Shihan Dana Abbott coming up. Can't wait to have him tell you his story, and so many more coming up, not only through the end of 2022, but I have guests scheduled all the way through 2023 as well, and adding each and every day. If you want to be a guest on the Master Motivation Podcast, please email me at mastermotivationpodcast@gmail.com. Like, share, and follow our social media, and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can see what's coming up next. Once again, Dan Farren, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you for having me on, and thank you everyone who listened and enjoyed it or took something from it. Yeah, just keep thanking people. Just keep living and living large. Like I said, live like David Crosby said, eat life in big bites. Don't do anything where at the end of your life you go, I wish I would have done that. That's one of the things that I feel really big about. Don't wait till the last minute. Do it now.
We will end with that. And Dan, I'll see you in about 60 seconds. Thank you, guys. Make it a great week.